The ships came without warning. They blotted out the sun over Busan, not with shadows, but with a cold, pale light that made everything look like a faded photograph. Their silence was worse than any sound. In a matter of hours, the great port city was quiet. The guns of the human militaries fell silent first, their electronics dead. Then the people fell silent too, under the gaze of the floating drones and the tall, armored figures who marched through the streets. These invaders called themselves the Consensus. They did not explain their purpose. They simply enforced their rules. Resistance was met with a swift, painless beam of light that left a body collapsed, unharmed but unconscious for days. It was a defeat that felt like being put to sleep a year later. Jay walked through the quiet streets. He was a man in his 40s, his face now carrying lines that weren't there before the arrival. He had been a civil engineer, someone who built things. Now he translated. The Consensus had scanners for language, but they valued a living voice to speak their decrees. Jay had been pressured into the role. They had found his sister, Mina. His cooperation kept her safe, they said. It was a simple, terrible bargain. His footsteps echoed on the clean pavement. The Consensus kept everything orderly, sterile. The life of the city, the shouts of market vendors, the laughter from cafes, the chaotic noise of a million people living, was gone. Replaced by a low hum of alien machinery and the soft whir of surveillance drones, today's destination was the former city hall. Its modern glass front was now framed by sweeping, seamless arcs of Consensus metal, a physical symbol of the old world wrapped and contained by the new. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of ozone. Consensus soldiers, clad in sleek gray armor that seemed to absorb light, stood motionless at intervals. Their helmets were smooth, featureless ovals. Commander Kale awaited him in the central chamber. The alien leader was taller than the others, his armor edged with faint silver lines. He did not sit on the human chairs, but stood before the large window, looking out over his quiet domain. As Jay approached, Kale turned. There was no face to see, only that smooth helmet, but his voice emerged from a speaker, calm and perfectly enunciated. "The preparations are complete, Jay?" "Yes, Commander," Jay said, his own voice feeling rough in comparison. "The remaining counselors have been assembled." "Good. This final ceremony is necessary. Your species clings to symbolism. The physical act of signing, of yielding your will onto a document, will sever that final thread of hope. It will make your compliance real to you and to the others." Jay said nothing. He had learned that questions were pointless. Kale's logic was always cold, always several steps ahead, and utterly devoid of empathy. To the Consensus, this was not cruelty. It was efficiency. "You will sign first," Kale stated. "As the primary liaison, your capitulation sets the precedent. Then the others will follow." From a compartment on his forearm, Kale produced a single object. It was a pen, a human pen. It was a simple, metal-barreled tactile stylus, the kind once used on old touchscreens. It looked absurd in his gloved, alien hand. "A relic of your past," Kale said, offering it to Jay. "Its use today will give the event a poignant historical symmetry. You will use the tools of your old civilization to formally end it." Jay took the pen. It was cold. His fingers closed around it, and a wave of nausea hit him. This was it. His name, written by his own hand, would become the official mark of his people's surrender. He would be the one who made it real. He thought of Mina. She was being brought here too to watch, to ensure his cooperation was complete. The shame was a hot, heavy stone in his stomach. The chamber began to fill. A handful of defeated-looking men and women in rumpled suits were ushered in, the last remnants of the local government. Then, a group of ordinary citizens chosen as witnesses. Their eyes were downcast. Their shoulders slumped. Jay's eyes scanned the crowd, finding her immediately. Mina stood near the front. She was younger than him, her sharp, intelligent eyes taking in everything. Where others showed fear, she showed a tense stillness. She was a professor, a linguist who studied how meaning was built and conveyed. Her gaze met his, and for a second it was just the two of them in the room. He saw no accusation in her eyes, only a deep, unwavering focus. She gave him the smallest nod. It was not a nod of encouragement to sign. It was an acknowledgement. I see you. I am here. The ceremony began. Kale spoke, his voice filling the room, explaining the inevitable logic of the consensus rule, the futility of struggle, the peace that total surrender would bring. It was a speech for the humans, full of cold reason that felt like a prison. Then the moment arrived. A drone placed the document on a smooth, metal podium. The surrender text glowed on a thin, glass-like sheet. A blank line waited at the bottom. J. Kale's voice prompted. Proceed. All eyes were on him. The pen felt heavier than any tool he had ever held. He stepped to the podium. He looked down at the line. He pictured his name written there, forever in history as the first signature. His hand, which had once drawn blueprints for bridges and homes, trembled. It trembled not from fear of the aliens, but from the crushing weight of the act itself. He hesitated, the tip of the pen hovering just above the surface. A murmur, almost inaudible, went through the human crowd. Kale took a single step forward. The sound of his armor breaking his perfect stillness was loud in the quiet room. Your hesitation is illogical, the commander stated, his voice still calm but now edged with a hint of operational curiosity. The outcome is unchanged. Sign. Jay could not make his hand move. He was frozen between the shame of surrender and the terror of what would happen to Mina if he refused. Kale watched him for 3 long seconds. Then, with a sudden, swift motion, he reached out and plucked the pen from Jay's paralyzed fingers. Your emotional compromise renders you unsuitable for the primary act, Kale announced, as if diagnosing a faulty machine. He turned his helmet towards the crowd of witnesses, his gaze sweeping over them before landing on Mina. You, he said, the speaker pointing the pen directly at her. The sibling. You will sign. The genetic relation provides adequate symbolic continuity. The result is identical. A soldier guided Mina forward. She walked with a calm, steady pace that seemed to belong to a different world than the one of fear they were in. She stopped before the podium, looking first at Jay's pale, devastated face, then up at the impassible helmet of Commander Kale. He extended the pen to her. Holding it by the very tip between his thick, gloved fingers, she reached out. Her hand was steady. Her fingers closed around the cool, metal barrel of the pen. And the room waited. The air in the chamber was perfectly still, yet it felt thick enough to choke on. Every human eye was fixed on Mina, standing alone before the metal podium. The glass-like sheet with its glowing surrender text waited. Commander Kale loomed beside her, a statue of gray armor and cold purpose. Mina took the pen. Her fingers settled into a familiar grip, one used for marking student papers and sketching linguistic diagrams. The metal was smooth, slightly cold. She looked down at the document, not reading the words, but studying the surface. It was not paper. It was a consensus data slate, sensitive to touch and conductive input. The pen in her hand was not just any pen. She recognized the model. It was an old-style capacitive stylus, designed for precise work on early tablets. Its tip was a soft, conductive rubber, meant to complete a tiny electrical circuit with a screen. Her mind, trained for years in patterns, symbols, and the architecture of communication, began to move at a speed that felt separate from her still body. This was not a moment for emotion. This was a puzzle. The consensus saw this act as pure theater. They believed the power was in the symbol of the signature itself. They did not understand that the human tool, the context, and the surface were all pieces of a different kind of equation. She glanced up at her brother. Jay's face was a mask of agony. He saw only her sacrifice, her name being the one recorded for history. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, his eyes begging for forgiveness. Mina looked back at him and gave a small, calm blink. It was not a blink of reassurance, but of focus. Watch, it seemed to say. Commander Kale's voice broke the silence. Proceed. Place your identifier on the designated line. Mina lowered the pen. She touched the tip to the slate, not on the signature line, but a few centimeters above it. She did not write her name. Instead, she began to draw a line. It was a slow, deliberate stroke, horizontal and straight, that a ripple of confusion passed through the human witnesses. This was not how you started a signature. Kale tilted his head. The line is below. You are incorrect. Mina did not acknowledge him. Her entire world had narrowed to the point of the stylus and the glowing surface. The horizontal line was done. From its center, she drew a vertical line down, then a quick, angled line back up, creating a sharp, simple shape. It looked like a crude arrowhead or a circuit diagram symbol for a ground. She was not drawing a picture. She was drafting. She remembered a lecture from years ago on semiotics in early computing. She had shown her students a primitive circuit diagram, explaining how these simple drawn lines represented physical connections that could create or break a function. She recalled, with perfect clarity, a particular fractal noise pattern she'd used in a collaborative study with a neuroscientist friend. The study was about brainwave interference. The pattern, when translated into a specific digital signal, had caused a brief but noticeable corruption in the lab's audio recording systems. It was an anomaly they'd never pursued. A curiosity. Her hand moved faster now. She added more lines around her initial shape, connecting them in a way that mimicked a basic resonance circuit. She drew a small, repeating zigzag pattern next to it, a child's drawing of lightning or a visual representation of chaotic interference. The room was utterly silent except for the faint whisper of the stylus on the slate. The humans were bewildered. The consensus soldiers stood motionless, awaiting a command. This human behavior was outside their predictive models. Kale took a step closer. The smooth helmet looked down at her scribbles. This is not an identifier. You are malfunctioning. You will sign your name. His voice was still logical, but a new note had entered it. The impatience of a technician facing an unexpected error. Mina's eyes flicked to the podium itself. It was made of the same seamless consensus metal, but it was attached to the building. A single, thin cable, almost hidden in its design, trailed from its base and into the floor. Power, data, control. Her drawing was nearly complete. It was a nonsensical mess to anyone looking for a name. But to Mina, it was a schematic. It was a map of an idea. Introduce a chaotic pattern signal into a conductive system. She finished the final stroke of her pattern. Now came the true gamble. The document slate was conductive. The pen tip was conductive. The metal podium was conductive. They were all separate, but they could be connected with a motion that looked like a frustrated scribble. She deliberately dragged the tip of the stylus off the edge of the glass slate and onto the bare metal frame of the podium. She scraped it along the surface, making a faint, unpleasant sound, moving it towards a small, recessed port where the cable connected. Cease! Kale's command was sharp. A soldier took a step forward. It was too late. The stylus tip touched the brushed metal edge of the cable port. For a human, it was nothing. No spark, no shock. But in that instant, the conductive tip completed a circuit between the data slate and the podium's grounded metal housing. The slate, designed to read precise input, received one final, chaotic command from Mina's drawn pattern. It was a jumble of data points, a burst of meaningless noise. But that noise was injected directly into the podium's wiring, which fed directly into the City Hall's local consensus network hub, the same network that fed Commander Kale's personal command node. The device fused to his armor that let him control the local systems and communicate with his fleet. The system's defenses were designed to stop hacking, viruses, and power surges. They were not designed to stop a strange, patterned burst of static introduced through a touchscreen pen at a surrender ceremony. For half a second, nothing happened. Then, the lights in the chamber flickered. Not a power loss, but a stutter, a hesitation. Commander Kale suddenly stiffened. A low, digital crackle emitted from his helmet speaker, drowning out his words. The silver lines on his armor flared brightly, then pulsed erratically. He took one jerky, stumbling step backward, his arms twitching at his sides. The flawless, imposing figure was now shuddering, locked in a silent, internal storm. The feed from his neuro interface was a screaming wave of corrupt data, flooding his system with the digital equivalent of a madman's scribbles. He crashed to his knees, then onto his side with a heavy thud, his limbs seizing for a moment before falling still. The lights in the room stabilized, but now hummed at a different, uncertain pitch. The silence that followed was total and profound. The humans stared, uncomprehending. The consensus soldiers stood frozen for a crucial moment, their systems processing the loss of the command signal from their fallen leader. In that moment, Jay's eyes met Mina's across the room. He saw no triumph in her face, only a fierce, clear intensity. She had not signed. She had not surrendered. She had simply drawn a reply. Time, which had stretched thin during Mina's drawing, now snapped forward with a jolt. The heavy thud of Commander Kale's armored body hitting the floor seemed to shake the entire room. For 3 long seconds, there was only the low, erratic hum of the lights and the stunned silence of everyone present. Then, chaos broke its leash. From the smooth helmets of the consensus soldiers came a burst of sharp, digital chatter. It was not speech, but system alerts, frantic and confused. Their primary command link was down. The figure that issued their orders was a twitching heap on the ground. Their programming flooded with conflicting protocols. They raised their weapons, but they did not fire. They turned their featureless faces towards each other, then towards the humans, seeking a new directive. Jay was the first human to move. The shock that had frozen him melted away, replaced by a raw, instinctive drive. His eyes were no longer on his fallen sister, but on the soldier closest to him. The soldier was distracted, his weapon wavering as he tried to interpret the noise in his helmet. Jay did not think. He acted. He lunged forward, not with a fighter's grace, but with the desperate strength of a man who has been pushed too far. He collided with the soldier, his hands grappling for the weapon. It was a smooth, pistol-like device, cool to the touch. The soldier, surprised by the physical attack from a supposedly broken human, struggled. But Jay had weight and sheer desperation on his side. He wrenched the weapon free. He didn't know how to fire it. He pointed it at another soldier who was turning towards the commotion and pressed what looked like a trigger. There was no beam of light. Instead, a wave of visible sound, a ripple in the air, shot out. It struck the soldier square in the chest plate. The soldier didn't fall unconscious. He convulsed violently, his armor locking up, and he dropped like a stone, rigid and paralyzed. A new sound rose over the confusion. A human shout. It came from one of the former counselors, a woman who had been standing with her head bowed minutes before. The shout was wordless, pure rage and release. She grabbed a heavy data terminal from a desk and threw it at a drone that was buzzing towards Kale's body. The drone swerved, crashing into a wall. The spell of passive defeat was broken. The other witnesses, who moments ago had been a crowd of ghosts, became individuals again. They scrambled. Some dropped to the floor, seeking cover. Others, fueled by a year of bottled-up fury, imitated Jay. They attacked not with skill, but with sheer numbers and surprise, swarming the disoriented soldiers, grabbing at their weapons, pulling them down with the weight of bodies. Mina stood still by the podium, a quiet island in the storm. Her work was done. She watched the result of her puzzle with wide, analytical eyes. She saw the systems failing. The main doors to the chamber, which had slid shut automatically, now jerked in their frames, opening halfway and then closing again, caught in a loop. The drones in the room flew in erratic, jerking circles or hovered listlessly. Her gaze found Jay again. He was backing towards her, the alien weapon held in both hands, his knuckles white. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his face other than shame or fear. She saw a wild, burning question. "What did you do?" he yelled over the noise. "I gave them a wrong answer," she said, her voice strangely calm. Their system didn't know how to read it. An alarm began to sound elsewhere in the building. A deep, pulsing tone that was nothing like a human siren. It was a consensus alert. Reinforcements would be coming. But they would be coming to a node in crisis, a command hub that was reporting catastrophic and illogical errors. Jay understood the meaning of the alarm. He grabbed Mina's arm. "We have to go." Now, the lower levels, Mina said quickly, her mind already shifting to the next problem. The detention block. The power fields would be on the same local grid. If the system is confused, she didn't finish. Jay understood. The people held downstairs, the ones who had fought back early and been captured, were the real resistance. If the doors were open, even for a minute, he pulled her towards a service entrance at the side of the chamber, one he knew from his forced liaising duties. A soldier moved to block their path. Jay, without hesitation, raised the weapon and fired. Another ripple of concussive sound. The soldier was thrown back, his armor locking rigid before he hit a wall. They burst into a stark, gray hallway. The alarm was louder here. From a ceiling speaker, a calm consensus voice repeated, "Local system anomaly. Stand by for directive." Local system anomaly. They were not words of threat. They were words of profound confusion. To the consensus, this was not an attack. It was a glitch. A catastrophic, incomprehensible glitch. As they ran, Jay felt a sensation he had not felt in a year. It was not quite hope. It was something hotter and more immediate. Possibility. The flawless, invincible machine of the occupation had a crack in it. His sister, with a pen, had found it. Behind them, in the central chamber, the human witnesses had overpowered 2 more soldiers. The remaining ones, receiving no clear orders, began a tactical retreat, backing towards their own secure doorways, their programming prioritizing the reestablishment of a clean command chain. They left their commander on the floor, his armor occasionally twitching as corrupted data snaked through his neural interface. The surrender document still glowed on the podium, untouched. Below Mina's strange, hand-drawn diagram, the signature line remained blank. The pen lay on the floor beside Kale's outstretched hand, a simple metal cylinder. It looked harmless. It looked small. But in the humming, chaotic silence of the chamber, it looked like the most important object in the world. The gray hallway was a maze of harsh light and echoing alarm. Jay ran, pulling Mina behind him. The alien weapon was a cold, unfamiliar weight in his other hand. He had no plan beyond the most basic instinct. Away from the chamber, away from the soldiers. Mina ran differently. Her eyes scanned the walls, the ceiling panels, the small glowing indicators beside the doors. She was not just fleeing. She was navigating. "Left here," she said, her breath coming in short gasps. "The service stairs are left. The main lifts will be locked down." Jay didn't question her. He swerved left, finding a heavy door marked with symbols he now recognized as maintenance access. He pushed. It didn't budge. "Central lock," he grunted. Slamming his shoulder against it uselessly, Mina pointed her chin at a small panel to the side of the door. "It's on the local grid. Try the weapon on the panel." Jay stared at her, then at the smooth panel. It made a terrible kind of sense. He aimed the pistol-like device at the center of the panel and pressed the trigger. There was no dramatic explosion. The panel simply went dark with a faint pop, and the door gave a soft click. Jay shoved it open, revealing a concrete stairwell leading down into gloom. The familiar, dirty smell of an old building basement greeted them, a stark contrast to the sterile consensus air. They took the stairs 2 at a time. The pulsing alarm was muffled here, replaced by the sound of their own footsteps and their ragged breathing. "What did you draw, Mina?" Jay asked as they descended, the question bursting out of him. "What was it?" "A pattern," she answered, her voice echoing off the walls. "A noise pattern, from an old study. It confuses simple systems." It was a guess. A good guess. "It was more than a guess," Jay said. He looked back at her, his face illuminated by a flickering emergency light. "You broke him. You broke their commander." "No," Mina corrected, her mind still working. "I didn't break him. I gave his machine a question it couldn't understand. It's trying to answer and it can't. That's what's causing the seizure." To Jay, it was a miracle. To Mina, it was cause and effect. A faulty input creating a systemic error. But the result was the same. The door at the bottom of the stairs was another secure one. But this one was already partially open. jammed in its track. The lights beyond were strobing erratically. They slipped through into a wider corridor. This was the detention level. The air was colder. A row of cell doors lined the wall. These were not bars, but fields of shimmering, amber light, humming with power. Or they had been. Now, the light fields flickered like faulty bulbs. Some were completely dark. The door behind them slid open. Others flashed on and off. In one cell that was dark, a figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the strobe lights. A man, dressed in torn, practical clothing. He was peering out, his body tense with confusion and suspicion. He saw Jay and Mina first. His eyes went to the weapon in Jay's hand. He stepped fully into the corridor, moving with the cautious grace of a fighter. Jay? The man's voice was rough from disuse. It was Day, a former bus driver who had been one of the first to organize a resistance cell. He'd been captured months ago. "Your door is open," Jay said, stating the obvious, his voice full of disbelief. "The light went out," Day said, his eyes narrowing. "A minute ago. All of them flickered and died. What's happening upstairs?" "That alarm, it's not a drill. The commander is down," Jay said quickly. "The control system is confused. Mina did it." Day's eyes flicked to Mina, the quiet professor. He saw no weapon in her hands, only a sharp, focused expression. He didn't ask for details. The open door was detail enough that he turned and shouted down the corridor, his voice powerful and clear. "It's real. The doors are open. Move. Now." From the other dark cells, figures emerged. Men and women, some thin and bruised, all with the hardened look of people who had chosen defiance. They gathered in the flashing hallway, a group of about 15. They saw Jay with the alien weapon. They saw the open doors. They didn't need a speech. "Weapons?" a woman named Sue asked, her voice tight. "Only what we can take from them," Jay said, lifting the pistol. "Their system is blind up there. But not for long." Day nodded, a fierce grin breaking across his face. "Then we don't have long. You know the layout. Where do we go?" Jay thought of the building schematics he'd been forced to study. "Armory is on this level. West corridor. It's guarded by 2 soldiers and an automated sentry. If their systems are glitching, the sentry might be too," Mina said quietly. Day looked at his people, then back at Jay. "Lead the way." The group moved down the corridor, a sudden, silent force. They passed other cells where the light fields still weakly shimmered. Inside, prisoners pressed against the failing energy, their faces desperate. Day and others didn't hesitate. They used pipes torn from the wall, heavy boots, anything they could find to slam against the control panels next to the doors, smashing them until the lights sputtered and died. Their numbers grew. The once silent detention block was now filled with the sounds of breaking panels, released doors, and urgent whispers. They reached a junction. Down the west corridor, they could see the armory door. A single consensus soldier stood before it, his posture unsure. The automated sentry, a floating sphere with a single red lens, spun in slow, lazy circles near the ceiling, its red light blinking on and off irregularly. The soldier saw them. He raised his weapon, his helmet scanning the crowd. He issued a command in the consensus language, the words sharp but the tone uncertain. Jay raised his own weapon, but Day put a hand on his arm. "Wait!" They watched. The soldier took a step back towards the door, then stopped. He seemed to be listening to something in his helmet. He looked at the malfunctioning sentry. He looked back at the crowd of determined, advancing humans. His programming was at war. Hold the position or retreat and regroup for a clear tactical response. He chose retreat. He fired a single, warning shot from his weapon into the ceiling, then turned and ran down an adjacent hallway. The malfunctioning sentry beeped sadly and drifted after him, bumping into the wall. For a moment, the freed prisoners just stared. A consensus soldier had just run from them. It was an unimaginable sight. Then, with a collective shout, they rushed the armory door. It was locked, but it was just a physical lock now. They broke it open with a roar. Inside were racks of the pistol-like weapons, heavier rifle models, and belts of small, disc-shaped devices. Jay stood in the doorway, watching as the resistance armed itself with the tools of their occupiers. The hum of the alien alarm was a constant backdrop. He looked at Mina beside him. She was watching too, her face calm but her eyes alive. She had not signed the surrender. She had used the pen to write a different command. And now a handful of desperate people were reading it, loud and clear. The armory was a place of cold, clean lines and soft blue light. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of heavy breathing and the clatter of weapons being lifted from their racks. The freed prisoners moved with a hungry efficiency, strapping on belts, checking the unfamiliar weight of the consensus rifles. Day held up one of the disc-shaped devices. "Does anyone know what these are?" "No," Jay said. "But take them. If we don't know, they might not either." Mina stood near the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. The analytical rush was fading, leaving behind a deep, trembling cold. She had solved the puzzle, but now they were in the middle of the storm it had created. She watched as her brother, the quiet engineer, transformed. Jay was handing a rifle to a young woman, showing her quickly where to aim, how the trigger felt. His voice was low and steady. He was building something new, right here in the ruin of the old world. Day finished arming himself and approached Jay. "We can't stay here. The confusion won't last. They will reboot systems, send reinforcements from other sectors. We need to get out of the city, to the old docks, the maintenance tunnels. We have caches there." Jay nodded. "The main entrance is a death trap. There's a vehicle bay on the north side. Service exits for their skimmers. The vehicles will be locked. Consensus coded," a man named Tay said, slinging a rifle over his shoulder. "Same system," Mina said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She met their gazes, forcing her voice to be clear. "The confusion is in the local network. The building's mind is sick. If we can get to the vehicles, their locks might be sick too. Or we can make them sick." Day gave a short, sharp nod. "We go for the vehicles. Jay, you lead. You know the way." The group, now 23 strong and armed, moved back into the strobing corridor. They were no longer prisoners or witnesses. They were a single unit, a spark trying to become a flame. They moved quickly but with purpose, Jay at the front with Day. They encountered 2 more soldiers. These 2 had formed a defensive position behind a heavy console. They fired first, beams of concussive energy rippling down the hall. A man behind Jay cried out as the edge of a beam grazed his arm, numbing it instantly. Jay and Day returned fire. The shots from the human-held weapons were wild, but they filled the hallway with rippling distortions. One shot hit the console, and it erupted in a shower of sparks. The soldiers ducked. In that moment, Sue and 2 others rushed forward, not firing, but closing the distance. They tackled the soldiers to the ground in a tangle of limbs and armor. The fight was brutal and short, decided by sheer weight and surprise. The soldiers' weapons were taken. "See," Day said, helping Sue up. "They don't know how to fight like this. They only know how to control." They reached the doors to the vehicle bay. It was a large, sealed portal. A control panel glowed steadily beside it, untouched by the chaos elsewhere. This system was more isolated. "It's not open," Tay said, his voice tight with disappointment. Mina stepped forward. She looked at the panel. It was a touch interface similar to the surrender slate but simpler. She looked at the weapon in Jay's hand. "The same principle," she murmured. "An overload. A wrong answer." She took the weapon from him. Its weight surprised her. She aimed it not at the panel's center, but at its edge where it met the wall. "Stand back," she fired. The ripple of sound hit the junction between the panel and the wall. The panel didn't just go dark. It cracked, and a small tendril of smoke curled out. The door didn't click open. Instead, with a groan of stressed metal, it jerked violently in its track, sliding halfway open before grinding to a halt. Stuck fast that IT was enough. A gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through point one by one. They slipped into the vehicle bay. It was a vast, dim space. 3 sleek, gray skimmers hovered silently on a repulsor field near the far wall. They looked like giant, smooth beetles. There were also smaller, open-top scout vehicles. They ran towards the nearest skimmer. Its side door was sealed. Jay saw no handle, no keyhole. The ignition will be neural, keyed to a soldier, Day said, slapping the smooth hull in frustration. Mina was already looking past the vehicles, to the wall of the bay. There, running in neat conduits, were thick bundles of crystalline cabling. The building's primary data and power feeds. The local network's arteries. She pointed. There. That's the system. That's what's confused. So? Jay asked. So we don't ask the vehicle to start, she said, a new idea forming. We ask the building to tell it to start. And we ask with another wrong answer. She looked at the disc-shaped devices on Day's belt. Give me one of those. Day handed her a disc. It was cool with a single, small depression on one side. A trigger. We don't know what it does, he warned. We know it's consensus, Mina said. That's enough. She walked to the conduit bundle. She placed the disc flat against the largest cable, holding it there. She looked at the others. Cover your ears. And turn away. She pressed the depression. There was no explosion. Instead, a piercing, high-frequency shriek emitted from the disc, a sound that felt like needles in the teeth. The crystalline cable under the disc glowed white-hot for an instant. All the lights in the vehicle bay died, plunging them into near darkness, then flickered back on as emergency red lamps engaged. And with a soft, hydraulic sigh, the doors on all 3 skimmer vehicles slid open. Their interior consoles lit up, screens flashing through rapid, error-filled diagnostics before settling on a standby mode. The shriek had been a systemic kill command, a device for shutting down enemy tech. Fired directly into the building's nervous system, it had caused a final, catastrophic reboot. For a few precious minutes, every consensus lock, code, and security protocol in the building was null. It was a clean, blank slate. Day laughed, a short, shocked bark of sound. He climbed into the lead skimmer's pilot seat. The controls were strange, but the basics were clear. A yoke for direction, a lever for thrust. Everyone in, he yelled. Take all 3. Go, go, go. People scrambled into the vehicles. Jay pulled Mina into the lead skimmer with Day. The doors slid shut. Through the front viewport, they saw the large bay doors begin to grind open, their safety protocols wiped. Day pushed the thrust lever. The skimmer lifted smoothly, silently, and glided forward into the dull red light of the emergency exit tunnel. Behind them, in the heart of City Hall, the consensus systems were slowly, methodically, coming back online. They would find their commander incapacitated, their prisoners gone, their armory looted, and their vehicles stolen. The event would be logged not as a military defeat, but as a catastrophic local system anomaly. The report would note that the human surrender document remained unsigned. The final input recorded was not a name, but an erratic, nonsensical scribble as the skimmer burst out of the tunnel into the foggy night air of occupied Busan. Mina looked back at the shrinking, silent building. The pen was still there on the floor, but the message had been sent. The night air was cold and wet with sea fog. The stolen skimmer cut through it like a knife, silent except for the low hum of its repulsors. Day guided it low, skimming just above the empty streets, avoiding the bright lanes the consensus used for patrols. The other 2 vehicles followed close behind, ghosts in the gray mist. Inside, no one spoke. The adrenaline of the escape was hardening into a sharp, focused tension. They were out of the cage, but they were still deep inside the zoo. Mina stared out at the sleeping city. The familiar neon signs were dark. The only lights were the steady, pale blue lamps the consensus had installed on every corner. Busan was a city of shadows now, holding its breath. Jay watched the sensor screen on the console. It showed a simplified map of the city. Several red icons pulsed at the location of City Hall. They were moving, spreading out in a search pattern. But they were slow, uncertain. They're looking, Jay said, his voice low. But they're looking for a system error, not for us. Not yet. Day nodded, his hands tight on the controls. That gives us time. Not much. Where are these tunnels? South docks. Old storm drainage and service access for the shipyards, Jay said. He had worked on those plans years ago. The entrances are hidden, overgrown. The consensus maps are too new, too clean. They might not have them. Mina listened, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about patterns again. The pattern of the search on the screen. The pattern of the city lights. The pattern of consensus behavior. Logical, systematic, predictable. They had exploited a crack in that predictability. To survive, they had to keep doing it. They had to stay irrational, stay unexpected. They flew over a wide boulevard. Below, a single consensus patrol skimmer drifted slowly along its programmed route. Day held his breath, easing their vehicle behind the cover of a tall, darkened apartment block. The patrol did not alter its course. It hadn't seen them. It wasn't looking for rogue vehicles. The idea was probably not even in its protocol. 10 minutes later, the landscape changed. The orderly streets gave way to the industrial mess of the old docks. There were skeletal gantries, rusting shipping containers stacked like forgotten blocks, and warehouses with broken windows. Here, the consensus lights were fewer. The fog was thicker, smelling of salt, oil, and decay. There, Jay pointed to a hulking shape against the waterline, a derelict dry dock facility. The main entrance is inside the third service bay. The door looks welded shut. It's not. Day guided the skimmer down into a dark alley between two warehouses. They landed with a soft bump. The other two vehicles settled behind them. The hum of the engines died, leaving an echoing silence broken only by the distant lap of water and the drip of condensation. Everyone climbed out, moving quickly and quietly. They gathered the stolen weapons and supplies. Day looked at the three sleek skimmers. We can't leave these here. They'll be a beacon. Tay, the man from the cells, stepped forward. He had a belt of the disk devices. A wrong answer for them too? He asked, looking at Mina. She considered it. A loud one. It will bring every patrol in the area. Good, Day said, a grim smile on his face. Let them look here. We won't be. He took two of the disks. He set one inside each of the two trailing skimmers, placing them on the central console. He set a short timer on each, a 5-minute delay. That should give us a head start. The group moved into the decaying dry dock building. It was a cathedral of rust and shadows. Jay led them through a maze of old machinery, his memory of the blueprints guiding him. They reached a heavy metal door covered in flaking paint and graffiti. It looked completely sealed. Jay and Day put their shoulders against it. With a groan of protest, it scraped inward, revealing a yawning black hole and a set of wet, concrete stairs leading down. The smell of damp concrete and stale air billowed out. One by one. They descended into the dark. Tay was the last. He paused at the top of the stairs, looking back the way they had come. He pulled the heavy door most of the way shut behind them, leaving only a sliver of night sky visible. The darkness in the tunnel was absolute. They used the low-light settings on the consensus rifles, which cast a soft, greenish glow. The tunnel was large, big enough for a truck to drive through. Water trickled along a central channel. The sound of their footsteps was muffled, swallowed by the immense quiet. They walked for what felt like a long time. Then, from far behind them, through the earth and concrete, they felt it more than heard it. A deep twin thud, a vibration through the ground. The disks had detonated. The consensus would now have two destroyed vehicles and a very clear, very loud location to investigate. It would look like a failed escape, a crash, a conclusion. Day stopped, letting the sound fade. Now we rest. For a minute. People slumped against the tunnel walls, breathing heavily. The cold damp seeped into their clothes. In the eerie green light, they looked at each other. They saw faces marked by fear, but also by a new, fragile hardness. Jay sat next to Mina on a dryish pipe. He handed her a water canister from the skimmer's supplies. "You're shaking," he said. "I'm cold," she replied, which was true. but she was also feeling the weight of it all. The pen, the drawing, the running. The responsibility of being the one who had broken the unbreakable. "You saved us," Jay said, not as praise, but as a simple fact. "No," Mina whispered, looking at the group resting in the green gloom. "I just gave the first wrong answer. They," she nodded towards Day, Sue, Tay, and the others, "are writing the rest of the story." From his pack, Day pulled out a small, battery-powered human radio. It was an old, forbidden thing. He switched it on. There was static, then a faint, repeating pattern of clicks. A resistance signal dormant for months. He adjusted the dial. The clicks became clearer as he looked up, his eyes reflecting the rifle's light. "They're out there." Others. They heard the silence break. Now they've heard those explosions. They'll know something happened at City Hall. He switched off the radio, preserving the battery. The returning silence of the tunnel felt different now. It was no longer empty. It was waiting. Jay stood up. "We can't stay here. These tunnels connect to the old subway lines, to the sewer system under the whole city. We have to keep moving. We have to find the others." Day nodded, pushing himself up. "Then we move. We stay in the places they forgot. We use the tools they don't understand." He looked around at his tired, armed group. "We are no longer prisoners. We are a system error. And we are going to spread." Weeks later, in a hidden room deep beneath the city, the air was warm with the heat of old pipes and the quiet buzz of human activity. The space was once a maintenance hub for the subway. Now it was a nerve center. Maps of Busan were pinned to the walls, covered in handwritten notes and symbols. Wires snaked from stolen consensus batteries to power banks of human-made computers and radios. Mina sat at a small table, a collection of scavenged parts before her. There was a broken data slate, a few more of the disk devices, and several simple pens. She was not drawing now. She was building, or rather, adapting. She carefully connected wires from a disk to a small speaker and a power cell, creating a crude, handheld device. Across the room, Jay and Day huddled with Sue and Tay over a newer map. Red marks showed consensus patrol routes. Blue marks showed safe passages through the tunnels and ruins. There were more blue marks every day. "The explosion at the dry dock worked better than we hoped," Day said, his finger tracing a line. "They poured forces there for 2 days, scanning the wrecks. They logged it as vehicle system failure leading to catastrophic detonation. By the time they looked elsewhere, we were already deep in the network." Jay nodded. "They still don't see us as a fighting force. We're a maintenance problem." "That is our strength," Mina said, not looking up from her work. She carefully soldered a connection, her hand steady. "They are looking for an enemy that fights logically. We do not. We are a wrong answer. A glitch." And they had been. The story of the ensign's surrender and the fallen commander had spread through the whispered networks of the occupied city. It was not told as a tale of a great battle, but as a secret, a legend. The Pen Protocol. It became a way of thinking. A resistance fighter didn't attack a patrol head-on. She would use a jury-rigged device to make their communicators shriek with feedback, sending them into confused retreat. A cache of food wasn't stolen. It was misplaced, when someone fed the inventory drone a string of nonsense codes, making it dump its load in an abandoned lot. Each act was small, illogical, and maddening to the consensus system. They were not losing soldiers. They were losing control. Mina finished her device. It was a small box with a single button. "This replicates the signal pattern," she explained to the room. "The one from the surrender slate. It's weak, short range. But if you attach it to a consensus data conduit, it should cause a local disruption for about 30 seconds. Lights, locks, sensors. A short window of confusion." Day took it, turning it over in his hands. 30 seconds is a long time. "Long enough," Sue said. She had used a similar device the week before to walk into a small drone depot and walk out with 2 cases of power cells while the guards struggled with doors that wouldn't open. The radio operator in the corner, a young woman named Hannah, suddenly waved for attention. She had headphones on. "They're talking about it," she said, her voice hushed. On a low-level consensus logistics channel. I've been piecing it together. Everyone turned. Hannah had a talent for languages just like Mina, but for machine codes. They're issuing a new directive, Hannah continued, reading from her notes. They are classifying recent anomalous events under a new protocol. They are calling it irrational human tactics. The directive advises local commanders to expect nonlinear, symbolic, or incoherent antagonism. It says to reboot systems more frequently and to avoid relying on single neural command nodes in human-populated areas. A slow smile spread across Day's face. It was not a happy smile. It was a fierce, proud one. They made a category for us. We're not a war. We're a problem they have to write a manual for. Jay looked at Mina. She had set down her tools. Her expression was thoughtful. They are adapting, Mina said. That's logical. But the adaptation is to see us as irrational. That is a flaw. They will try to predict the unpredictable. They will waste resources guarding against scribbles when the next move might be a song or a silence. That was the heart of it. The pen protocol was not a weapon. It was a key. It unlocked a way of thinking that had been buried under the weight of defeat. It reminded people that a tool is only a tool. A pen could sign a surrender, or it could ask a question a machine could not answer. A voice could beg for mercy, or it could sing a tune that jammed a drone's frequency scanner. Later, Jay found Mina by one of the old steam pipes, looking at nothing. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I was just thinking about Commander Kale. Is he alive, I assume? His systems would have purged the corruption eventually. He is probably back at his post." She looked at Jay. "But he handed me a pen to make things simple, to end the story, and I used it to make things complicated, to start a new one. I wonder if he understands that. I wonder if he can." Outside their hidden room, in the vast, dark network of tunnels, the resistance moved. They carried stolen tools and homemade devices. They passed the story along. They did not have an army. They had a method.in, the consensus command center. Now, with redundant systems and increased security, the report on the Busan anomaly was filed away. The surrender document was archived. Its strange, hand-drawn diagram labeled as corrupted data. The physical pen was collected as evidence and stored in a sterile container. It sat there. A simple metal cylinder. It looked harmless. It looked small. But in the humming, orderly silence of the consensus archives, surrounded by flawless logic and perfect data, it looked like the most dangerous thing in the world.